There's a lot of excitement in this space, of course. Lots of interesting, innovative technology. Also a little bit of skepticism, efficiency. What does that mean for change in our organizations? Can you talk to me a little bit about your perspective? What are your opinions on IoT and where it's heading?
Yeah, so I mean, IoT itself is a bit of a loose term, Internet of Things. It gets thrown around quite a bit. And I mean, essentially, you could say it's anything and everything that's connected to the internet. So like your phone, even your cars, watches. But I think to us, what it means is it's all about being able to drive outcomes through the interconnectedness of these devices and what we call ambient intelligence. So I think like a smartwatch is a good example in terms of introducing the concept of ambient intelligence and connectedness. So, you used to have a standard watch, just tells the time. But now your watch has sensors. It can look at your health metrics. It can send you notifications from your phone. It also has some algorithms running on it that helps it understand how you're walking. So all of that really is ambient intelligence. And we're kind of focused at how we can sort of introduce some of these technologies and interconnectedness into the market to drive more change.
Okay.
And I think in terms of, when you look at sort of the excitement as well as the skepticism, I'm aware that a lot of people have tried their hand in this sort of space and maybe they didn't have a good experience, right? Like they worked with something that was a bit finicky, it was sort of complex to get working, and they just didn't have a good sort of outcome out of it. At the other end, you also have people who are super excited. It's a little bit, it can be a little bit about tech for the sake of tech, just kind of introducing tech. And I think you'd agree you'd want to be somewhere in the middle. But I mean, the technology has come a long way. It's sort of caught up with the concept of IoT. We spoke with a hospital recently, and when we mentioned asset tracking, they said, "Oh, this is something we tried, 5-10 years ago. These massive, black boxes that looked like tags wouldn't fit on anything. Needed batteries changed all the time." And I mean, now we've got tags which are literally the size of SIM cards. It can last 2-3 years. We've got asset tracking technology like ultra wideband that can pinpoint things in under 30 centimeters. And, we've got sensors that don't even require batteries because they can harvest energy from the environment they're installed in.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it's an exciting time. And I think hopefully that skepticism that people have is slowly sort of falling away, making way for a bit more excitement. Because I think we're in an exciting time, an exciting space right now.
Absolutely. So I think everyone's kind of getting a little bit hands-on with IoT, and it's quite a broad term. So in your own home environment, you've got everything from a smart bell to a smart light bulb. But can we talk a bit about the practical terms in perhaps industry? How is this technology helping businesses and helping people to innovate beyond what a consumer IoT product does?
Yeah, it's interesting because the current state of the market is very unique. I mean, we've just come out of pandemic. There were numerous supply chain issues that everyone was affected by. So if I start with, for example, healthcare, I mean, you look at the NHS, especially the NHS has been struggling, and especially after the pandemic, they've been struggling with the load. So you can't introduce any piece of technology unless it has a tangible or concrete benefit that can be proven. So that's your first hurdle. However, when it comes to these benefits, I mean, the sort of solutions we're working on, they could be about the patient journey. So understanding how much time a patient's spending in a waiting room, how much time they spend with a clinician, how much time they spend on the bed, then managing those beds themselves in terms of how many beds are currently available, how many need cleaning, how many could be available in the next 5 hours. So some predictive analysis, being able to find medical equipment on time and find equipment that's available and ready to use. So we're solving these challenges, which are sort of the core problems within NHS, which need solving to be able to sort of make the most of the resources they currently have without needing to acquire new resources. And it goes back to this, everything is very outcome driven. So again, in the industrial space, it's all about reducing energy consumption. It's about improving efficiency of forklifts, of other machinery that's being used, and also improving worker safety through things like forklift collision avoidance systems. And we're also seeing a demand in sort of the smart building space, so like office spaces. Businesses want to understand how their office spaces are being utilized, how the meeting rooms are being utilized, how much energy are they spending based on how the building's being utilized. And again, the same things apply for education as well. University campuses are huge. not a lot of visibility on who's actually attending lectures, how much of the spaces and resources are being utilized. So we see a lot of crossover as well, but also some unique requirements. But everything is kind of currently being driven out of necessity rather than, oh, it's a nice to have feature.
Okay. I think the spaces that we occupy have definitely changed. I think about just our own office environment that we work from in Ingram Micro, and the capacity has massively changed from working patterns. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges in this space in terms of people? Because I think IoT is as much about the technology as it is the impact on people and that change. What are some of the challenges in that area?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, if you look at people, right, if you look at it from the end user's perspective, and when I say end user, I don't even mean someone who's necessarily installed or directly using the device, but might be affected by the device. So if you're an employee in an office that's introduced some of these sensors or technology that you're not quite sure what it is, it can raise a lot of concerns around like privacy.
Yeah.
And if you're introducing all of this, I mentioned ambient intelligence, around you, it's obviously gathering data.
Yeah.
And if you're around it, it's gathering data about you. So there's challenges there, which are sort of universal, I think, not just to IoT, but also just technology that we're seeing in general.
Yeah.
Then there's challenges in our space specific to us. So if you look at our community of SIs and resellers, right? Again, like I mentioned, if they've tried their hand in this space before, maybe they didn't have a good experience, it can be difficult to dive back into it. But even if they're trying to dive back into it, there is so much noise because the technology has sort of caught up. You've got hundreds, if not thousands, of like startups, almost duplicating efforts at some point, SMEs, even large vendors in this space, and it can be very difficult to sort of be able to understand, okay, what is actually usable here? What's reliable? What's going to stay here for the next 5 years and not disappear, at least for the next 5 years, right?
Okay.
So there's those challenges as well, and then there's the challenges around like who's physically deploying all of this, who's managing all of this. Again, if you think about this office, if you were to suddenly put in 500 people counting sensors and occupancy sensors, who's going to manage that? Is that the IT department? Do they know how to manage it? Because a lot of these devices are not even on the corporate network. They might be, the data might be backhauled using something else. So there's some question marks here.
Yeah.
And I think these are sort of challenges and obstacles that we've been trying to sort of overcome as you become more familiar with the space.
You've touched a little bit on the personal data side there. So from a security aspect, I believe there's a need for security in this solution. You've got a lot of endpoint devices, sometimes collecting actual personal data. How can a solution be spec'd out with security in mind, with a security first approach?
Yeah, that's another good question. So what we tend to do is we tend to firstly do our own testing to make sure we've understood, even if you leave security for a minute, how is the data being used? Where's the sensor sending the data, right? What data is it collecting? Does it need to collect the data that it's collecting for the purpose that it needs to sort of be used for? So we look at all of that from our perspective to make sure we've understood all of that and we're clear with the vendors we're working that we have that understanding. And then from a security perspective, we need to look at where the vulnerabilities lie. So again, how is it actually communicating to the network? Is it on the corporate network? In which case, the same security protocols would apply to it as if it was an IP device being introduced into the company's network. And sometimes you work with, the governance process with the customers can take some time to go through testing because they might have their own definite criteria that the device needs to adhere by. So they'll do their own testing. But from our perspective, we always try and make sure when we're validating the solution from a technical standpoint, we're working very closely with our partners as well as the end customers to make sure that the device solves what they're looking for, but it does it in a way where it's only collecting data that's necessary. It's all anonymized. There's no personal data being collected. An example would be if you were to take people counting sensors in an office, right? If someone was to look at one of those sensors, they'll see there's a little lens on it. And it might make them think that, oh, this is recording me, or now you know that it's me in the office. But actually what's happening is, and this is where the ambient intelligent piece comes in,
Okay.
It's taking the video data, but it's processing it on the sensor itself.
Interesting.
So the only data that's leaving the sensor, which we call as metadata, is the number of people it's seeing, but not who those people are.
Right.
And that's all the business needs, is the number of people. It doesn't need to know who exactly it was that was in the meeting room. And I think that's where sort of being transparent and open. So, for example, us working with manufacturers and suppliers, and then SIs working with us and working with end customers to make sure that there's education around this, but also there's transparency. And then there's a responsibility for the end customer to also be transparent with their sort of employees or associates to make sure they also are understood what the device is, what it does, and how it's being used for their benefit. Because at the end of the day, if we found, there was a boardroom that was only really ever being used by 4 people, that boardroom could be split into 2 or 3 meeting rooms, and that would really benefit everyone because everyone would have more space to work in.
Links back to what you were saying right at the start. It's all about requirement. It's about the outcome. Interesting. Okay. Could you talk to me, if I was a reseller looking to get into this space, what would be some of the challenges that I might face, and what is the best approach to achieving an IoT solution portfolio for myself?
Yeah, so I think if you were looking to start now, firstly, the time is perfect because, as I mentioned, the technology has matured to a level where it's sort of an ideal point to start, as well as the market demands have matured, where customers are actively looking out for these sorts of solutions. They're sort of seeking these out. But if you were to sort of start from scratch, there's a sort of significant amount of time and sort of investment needed to be able to build, I guess, a domain expertise in the space to understand everything that's out there. Because as we kind of spoke about, IoT can be a very broad term, and then understanding what you want to focus on, and then filtering out even further which suppliers you want to work with. But then there's a whole commercial piece, like how you're going to price this, what are the services going to look like, who's going to install and manage all of this. So I think, I can see, I don't want to mince my words, but it can be very sort of complex, and it can see like this enormous task that you have to do. But I think that's where you can start leaning on partners that can help you. And really, that's why Ingram's sort of invested in this team, which is, for us to build that expertise, for us to build that foundation, so that our partners are not starting from scratch. So they've got something to work with. And again, we can support as much or as little as needed. If someone was just starting out on this journey, we could almost hold their hand and take them through it end to end a few times until, they're sort of more familiar with this. But at the same time, we cover all market verticals, or almost all market verticals. But if you were sort of a reseller or someone who was hyper focused on one industry like healthcare, you could take what we have and just elevate it to another level because you'll have the focus that we don't. We're just doing the foundational work here, right?
Okay.
So I think that initial challenge it's all about collaboration. I think people tend to have this tendency to be secretive about what they're doing, but I think if you're trying to be secretive, it's going to be such a pain to learn everything by yourself. You almost have to like open source what you're learning and what you're trying to do. So that's, I think, a key challenge. And then when it comes to the actual sort of services, again, we can sort of support partners building their sort of wraparound services, whether it's to do with the physical deployment or the actual management afterwards and maintenance of the system. Those are also areas that we can support our partners in.
Yeah. I think talking with you, it's clear to see the passion you have for this particular industry. What do you think is the most exciting thing for you personally that's happening in this space?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a lot of interesting developments that have been happening. I think to me, this integration. So, IoT has kind of remained siloed for a while from these other spaces that we call like automation as well as AI. And there's been some work. I was involved in research previously, which was sort of an intersection of taking sensor data and performing something called human activity recognition. And I know there's work like this that's been done, but it hasn't really been sort of progressed. But I think we've reached a point now where we're seeing some very interesting applications. Yeah. So there's things that we're directly involved in. Again, if you think about healthcare, we're combining what we call sort of intelligent automation or robotics process automation with IoT, meaning that you can take data. I gave the example of that patient journey. Yes. So you could take all that data and you could automatically populate that in a patient health record system so that no one has to sit in front of a computer and manually sort of enter all of that data. So I think there's some interesting things there. But then also, there's some very interesting developments with sort of large language models. So if you think about an office space, it's one thing to give you a dashboard where you can see how your meeting rooms are being utilized. Yep. But it's a whole other thing where you can ask the system, so like, analyzing the data over the past month, what do you think I should do with my space? And it will tell you, oh, well, we think you should get rid of this boardroom, turn that into a meeting room, and you should maybe move where your teams are working. Yeah. So we're starting to really get to a phase where it's almost like data consultancy built into the solution itself.
Yeah.
And I think that excites me because now we're not just talking about technology, but the technology is becoming foundational to the outcome that we're trying to drive. And I think there's some, this is really what's needed to kind of grow these solutions, because there was always a problem. You've got all this data. Who's actually looking at it? Who's actually doing something about it?
Okay.
And that doing something, I think we're solving with AI.
Interesting. Okay. One of my favorite books, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I promise this does link back in. The answer. We have the answer. The answer's 42. But what is the question? What is the one question that you wish every customer would ask you?
The question is really, it's the other way around. To us is, what works for us is you need to tell us what are your problems that you're facing. And I think that's always a good starting point, because if we start with the question the other way around, so what often happens is we'll have partners or customers come to us and they'll ask us, oh, what can you do? Can you show us some examples of what you can do? And I think we always kind of fall into this, there's this issue of kind of showing the art of the possible, where the conversation becomes so big that you're kind of paralyzed. Like the ultimate question, like what to do about this? What direction do we go in? And it kind of becomes like 42, you know what to do with it, right? And I think where things work well is when you're looking at the business problems in terms of like, okay, it could be a partner telling us, look, we've wanted to be in the space, but here are our gaps. How can you help us build a strategy? Or it could be an end customer conversation they've brought to us, where it's an end customer telling us, this is our business. These are the key problems we're having in our business, and key problems that we can put a number against. And that's where we can go back and say, this is what the solution is. So we need the question for us to give the answer, rather than the other way around.
Okay, brilliant. What's one thing that you want everyone to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
I would say, if there's one thing that you want to take away from this, is that if you have been interested in the space and you've been thinking of being in the driver's seat, so driving this, being at the forefront of some of these advancements, then really the time is right now. This is when you want to get in on it, because we're seeing a lot of advancements, as we spoke about. We only really touched the tip of the iceberg in this conversation. But I think there's so much happening and there's so much yet to happen that it's the time is now to get involved. And if you need help, then don't sort of hesitate to ask for help. We're here. There's other people out there as well to help you. Just make sure that you're getting the support, you're collaborating. I think that's the only way, to tackle all the challenges we spoke about and sort of move forward.
Brilliant.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.